Hello, welcome to my YouTube channel. This is my first video, and I hope you like it. If not, I'm sorry. Now I want to talk about Homestuck. I don't know if you can tell, but when I was younger, I used to be pretty big into Homestuck. But I don't want to talk about Homestuck. I don't want to talk about the plot or the fandom in general, but rather one specific joke in Homestuck. What I would have to describe as the most profligately meta joke in anything that I'm at least familiar with. Now, you don't need to know anything about Homestuck. All relevant context for this joke is going to be provided during the course of this video. If you've never read it or have no intentions of reading it, that's fine. In fact, you can read the entirety of Homestuck right now to get to this joke, and you probably still won't be able to really understand what the joke is about. And that's not because it's some big brain, high IQ kind of joke that only super geniuses are going to be able to get. It's just a really, really stupid joke. But first, I do need to give a very brief explanation of what Homestuck is as a text and what Homestuck was as an experience. So, very simply, Homestuck is a webcomic that was originally hosted on mspaintadventures.com, but it's since just been renamed to homestuck.com because it was the most popular MS Paint adventure that was hosted on the website. Now, it was written by Andrew Hussey, and Andrew Hussey is going to be a key player in this story going forward, so just remember that. Now, within the website MS Paint Adventures, Homestuck is presented as a video game. You're not reading Homestuck, you're playing Homestuck. The characters are presented as sprites, they have inventories, and the story progresses by entering text-based commands, i.e. John, look around room. Now, at this point, the whole story is done, but when it started, these commands were actually reader-submitted. Hussey would upload a few pages and then open up a suggestion box for what would happen next, and then pick a command to progress the story. So Homestuck, as a text, was at least partially written by its audience as well as its author. Audience influences author, the author writes the story and tells jokes, and those create internal fandom memes, which further influence the story. This was Homestuck as an experience. So if you read through the whole story for the first time right now and get to a part where John is commanded to shit on his desk and scream a bunch, you may ask, why is this happening in the story? And the answer is easy enough. At some point, somebody submitted an LOL random command for John to do something silly, and that's the one that Hussey chose. I was able to explain that pretty quickly, actually. So that's all you really need to know about Homestuck for now, so let's actually talk about the joke. It starts with a series of pages uploaded January 9th, 2013. This character, Jane, has acquired a magic lollipop, which does make sense in context, but that's not relevant right now, and upon licking it, activates what's called trickster mode. Now, this isn't the joke yet, but this is also a pretty confusing thing to happen if you're just reading Homestuck as a text. Trickster mode originally appeared as an Easter egg in one of the Flash-based walk-around games, which I don't really think is accessible anymore because all of the Flash-based assets that were originally part of the comic have since been switched to YouTube videos after the story concluded. So I imagine somebody reading Homestuck for the first time would also have a couple questions right now. Anyway, after activating Trickster mode, Jane flies off and meets up with Jake, who she's secretly in love with. And under the influence of Trickster mode, having no inhibitions, she just tells him that she's in love with him, that she wants to get married, and she wants to have a bunch of babies. And Jake is terrified of her, and he asks her if she's feeling okay, to which she replies that she feels great. She feels peachy, written in all caps, big flashing letters with a selection of fruit, to which Jake responds in horror. And that's the joke. Now, if you don't understand what the joke is here, I can assure you that there's no deeper context to be gleaned through the text of Homestuck. There's not really a joke here. You might reasonably assume through the structure of the joke that it's meant to be a pun, but that's not exactly what's going on. So to peel back the layers of this joke onion, we need to get meta. So during Homestuck's run, Andrew Hussey would occasionally answer audience questions through Formspring or Tumblr. Anything from explanations to what's happening in the incredibly convoluted plot to broader world building. Well, on January 16th, 2012, Hussey is asked a very simple question. Who is the tallest of the trolls? That's a fictional alien species with orange horns. You may be familiar with them. Now, since all the characters in the comic are presented as sprites built from the same base template, some of their physical characteristics are a little unclear from the comic itself. Even on occasions where they may be drawn less stylized, these assets are often recycled for different characters in different situations. So there's a lot of room for fandom interpretation, but of course, plenty of people do want a canon official answer. Anyway, Hussey decides to take the piss out of them and say that Gamzee, who was widely interpreted to be the tallest troll, was actually the shortest one. Now, during this particular Q&A session, around 40 questions were answered, but this was the one that got the most attention on Tumblr, since it would theoretically have an impact on people's headcanons as well as fan art, whether from people who were taking it earnestly or from people who knew to be interpreting it as a joke. So a few hours later, Hussey posts again to Tumblr and explains that his Gamzee answer was a joke and that there actually is no canon official answer for how tall any of the characters are, and all interpretations are equally valid. The same going for other physical characteristics. Characters can be any weight, they can be thin or fat or yoked as hell, and it also goes for their race. Now this last one gets a bit of attention. A fair amount of people within the Homestuck fandom, which bear in mind is congregated on 2012 Tumblr at this point, get pretty upset at the insinuation that the human characters can be anything other than white. There's a few reasons for that. Some people are upset because, well, they see the kids as very obviously white, which, I mean, fair, you can look at them. And they don't like the idea of fan art depicting them as anything besides that being technically as canon or valid. You know, a very boilerplate, racist, reactionary response. But then there are others who are upset because they feel that Hussey has very clearly written 8 white, or at least white-coded characters, and is now trying to insinuate that he actually did not do that. Now, I do want to say that for what it's worth, this isn't the first time that Hussey has described the kids as being aracial, having said the same thing relatively early on into Homestuck's run. So it's not like he just made this up on the spot. Like Hussey said in his Tumblr post, he always colored himself, a white man, as orange in the comic, but he never applied any coloration to any of the human characters. So Hussey again weighs in and says that actually, if you think that the kids are very definitely, obviously white, and you don't think that it's possible to say that they could be anything else, then you're the racist one, because he never said or confirmed that they were white, you just assumed they were because of your own biases. Which is kind of like when J.K. Rowling suggested that there's no reason Hermione couldn't be black because there was no textual evidence saying that she wasn't. But there were at least a few times in the comic that the humans were referred to as being white, or referring to baby versions of themselves as pink monkeys. Plus, a few times people would ask if a certain character was fat, to which his answer was pretty consistently, you can see the characters in the comic. In fact, when people started to bring up that a character was literally referred to as a white guy, he went back and censored the word white, which was done as a joke, and he did pretty quickly change it back. Anyway, his adherence to this rule was definitely pretty loose. Now, I don't want to try to give the impression that this was some huge thing that shook the fandom or anything like that. This all took place over the course of like a few hours. It caused a bit of consternation, but the biggest impact was a new influx of fan art featuring more diverse depictions of the human characters' races, as well as body types and sizes for all characters. These already existed, but I would say they definitely became more popular as a result of all of this. And a lot more Homestuck merchandise would also begin to feature this more diverse fan art. Now that's the first bit of context. But we're not quite done yet. The full context for this joke actually comes after the joke itself is made. Let me explain. So after all this discussion of headcanon and race comes up, a year later we get this series of updates, including the Peachy joke. Now, Homestuck updates were sporadic and could contain any number of pages. The series of updates leading to the Peachy joke actually took place over the course of about 4 days. So in between Jane transforming into trickster mode and actually making the Peachy joke, there's a little bit of time for the fandom to actually react to what's happening in the comic. You can probably tell where this is going. Obviously, when Jane enters trickster mode, she's colored in and she's white. And so the discussion of race within Homestuck is resurrected, with some people feeling that the canon of the human characters being meant to be aracial is again being delegitimized by the text itself. I mean, I can imagine that it's probably pretty frustrating when the author tells you that you can interpret the characters however you want, and all of those interpretations are equally valid, but he seems to have his thumb on the scale for them being read a specific way. Like if you create a custom character for a video game, but in all the cutscenes they use the default name and model from the box art. And, well, Hussey decides to have a little bit of fun and make a joke of it. But the joke he makes is not the Peachy joke. No, the original joke is more direct and maybe a little bit easier to laugh at if you're doing a dry read of the comic. Originally, Jane literally says, "I feel so Caucasian," with a skin tone palette, and Jake still having the same exaggerated, agonized response. Personally, I thought this joke was pretty funny, and it didn't read to me as anything meant to antagonize, but some others didn't see it that way. Some people were voicing their frustration at Jane being depicted as white in canon, and felt like the joke was being made at their expense, ridiculing them for caring so much. Others used it as ammo to harass and tease the people who were upset, feeling like they were vindicated by the comic and that Hussey was taking their side against the more hypersensitive side of the fanbase. Hussey posted on Tumblr again and made it clear this wasn't what he intended with the joke. And if it was emboldening people to harass POC readers and fan artists, it just wasn't a hill worth dying on. So he changed it, and replaced Caucasian with Peachy and the skin tone palette with an assortment of fruit. And that's how the joke has remained ever since. And I think that this is the most esoteric joke in the entirety of Homestuck. There are plenty of jokes and references that either draw inspiration from or pay homage to the fanbase or Hussey's prior works. But I think they all still mostly stand on their own. Like, they're usually still jokes you can laugh at, you just gain maybe a little bit of extra appreciation for them through the added context. But I remember when this all happened and thinking to myself, even at the time, this page is going to be particularly weird for somebody reading Homestuck after it's done, which is why it's been rattling around in my head for the past 8 years. For what it's worth, I don't think Hussey was acting with ill will during any of this. I think he just never got super great with navigating the very passionate fan base Homestuck would eventually become known for. And that's all. Hope you liked this video. If you remember all this, I hope it was a good little bit of nostalgia for you. If you read Homestuck after it was over, I hope you appreciated this added little bit of context for a very strange joke. And if you've never read Homestuck, I mean, there are worse things you can do with your time, right? It's pretty fun. Please do the YouTube things. It feels really weird to say, but I'd like to try to grow a good channel, and if you do that stuff, it'll help. And then if it gets big, you can brag and say that you were into it before it was cool. Anyway, thanks, bye.